For most of the past decade, green hydrogen has been treated as an inevitability, a technology whose success was assumed, not questioned. Governments published roadmaps. Corporations announced partnerships. Developers released renderings of massive electrolyzer plants glowing in the desert or along coastlines. The story was simple and comforting. Costs would fall, scale would solve everything, and hydrogen would quietly slide into place as the backbone of a decarbonized industrial economy. But today, something very different is happening. Projects are being delayed, others are being downsized, some are being canceled outright. And behind nearly every one of those decisions is the same uncomfortable number: $2 per kilogram. This number has become the industry's moment of truth. Not because it is perfect or universally applicable, but because it exposes whether a project is rooted in reality or built on assumptions. At roughly $2 per kilogram, green hydrogen begins to compete with fossil-based alternatives in meaningful ways. Below it, industrial buyers start paying attention. Above it, enthusiasm fades quickly. And right now, most green hydrogen projects are far above it. This is where the conversation needs to change. Because the failure we are seeing is not primarily technological. Electrolyzers work. Renewable power works. Hydrogen can be produced cleanly and safely. The failure is economic, structural, and systemic. It is the result of projects being designed around optimism rather than constraints, and narratives rather than numbers. To understand why most green hydrogen projects are failing, you first have to understand why $2 per kilogram matters so much. Hydrogen is not competing in a vacuum. It is competing against gray hydrogen produced from natural gas, against fossil fuels embedded in industrial processes, and against incremental efficiency improvements that are often cheaper and easier to deploy. Even with carbon pricing and policy incentives, customers care about delivered cost, reliability, and risk. If hydrogen is too expensive, they simply wait. This creates a brutal reality for developers. You can build the cleanest hydrogen plant in the world, but if your hydrogen costs $4 or $5 per kilogram, your market shrinks dramatically. Offtake agreements become shorter, conditional, or non-existent. Banks become cautious. Equity investors demand higher returns, and the entire project structure begins to wobble. What makes this especially painful is that many projects were announced in an era of cheap capital, optimistic policy assumptions, and a belief that scale alone would solve the problem. That world no longer exists. Interest rates are higher, power markets are tighter, supply chains are constrained, and customers are far more skeptical than they were 5 years ago. The most common explanation offered for high hydrogen costs is electrolyzer pricing. The logic seems intuitive. Electrolyzers are expensive. Therefore, cheaper electrolyzers must equal cheaper hydrogen. This narrative has driven enormous investment into manufacturing capacity, gigafactories, and learning curve projections. And while electrolyzer costs do matter, they are not the dominant driver most people think they are. In many real projects, electrolyzers account for only a portion of total capital cost. Balance of plant, power infrastructure, water treatment, compression, storage, safety systems, and grid connections all add significant expense. On top of that, operational costs, maintenance, stack replacement, and degradation over time further erode the optimistic assumptions made during early modeling. But even more important than capital cost is utilization. A cheap electrolyzer that runs half the time produces expensive hydrogen. This is where many projects stumble. Renewable electricity is often intermittent. Solar peaks during the day, wind fluctuates unpredictably. Grid constraints limit availability. When electrolyzers are underutilized, fixed costs dominate the cost per kilogram. Many projects were modeled assuming capacity factors that look reasonable on paper, but are difficult to achieve in practice. Curtailment, grid congestion, maintenance downtime, and weather variability all reduce actual operating hours. When utilization drops from 70 or 80% to 40 or 50%, hydrogen costs rise sharply, and no amount of electrolyzer cost reduction can fully compensate for that. Electricity pricing itself is another major challenge. Developers often point to low headline power prices from renewable auctions or long-term power purchase agreements, but those prices rarely reflect the full delivered cost of electricity at the electrolyzer. Transmission fees, congestion charges, balancing costs, and grid upgrades add layers of expense. In some regions, securing firm, long-term power at predictable prices is becoming increasingly difficult. This leads to a deeper problem. Green hydrogen projects are not just energy projects. They are infrastructure projects layered on top of energy systems that were not designed for them. They require coordination across power markets, water resources, industrial zoning, safety regulation, and transport networks. Each interface introduces risk, delay, and cost. Permitting alone has become a significant obstacle. Hydrogen projects face scrutiny from multiple regulators, many of whom have limited experience with large-scale hydrogen infrastructure. Environmental reviews, safety assessments, community engagement, and legal challenges can stretch timelines by years. Delays increase financing costs and erode early cost assumptions. Then there is water. While hydrogen does not consume enormous amounts of water compared to many industrial processes, water availability, quality, and treatment still matter. In arid regions, water sourcing can become politically and socially contentious. Treatment systems add capital and operational cost. Disposal of brine and waste streams raises additional regulatory questions. All of this feeds directly into financing. Green hydrogen projects require large upfront capital investment and long payback periods. Lenders are conservative by nature, and hydrogen is still perceived as a relatively new and uncertain market. Without strong offtake agreements, banks apply higher risk premiums. Higher cost of capital translates directly into higher hydrogen costs. This is where many projects quietly fail, not in the press release phase, but in the financing phase. When assumptions are stress-tested by lenders, optimistic scenarios unravel. Power prices look less stable. Utilization looks less certain. Offtake commitments look weaker. The model no longer supports $2 per kilogram, and the project stalls. Demand-side reality compounds the problem. Industrial customers are interested in hydrogen, but they are not desperate. Steelmakers, chemical producers, and refiners operate on thin margins. They cannot absorb significantly higher input costs indefinitely. Many are willing to pilot hydrogen use, but few are willing to lock in long-term contracts at prices that threaten competitiveness. This mismatch between supply ambition and demand readiness is one of the defining features of the current hydrogen market. Developers build capacity hoping demand will materialize. Customers wait for prices to fall before committing. Policy tries to bridge the gap, but policy alone cannot rewrite basic economics. Subsidies can help, but they are rarely permanent. Tax credits, grants, and contracts for difference reduce risk in the early years, but they often come with conditions, uncertainty, and political exposure. Projects built on the assumption of indefinite subsidy support face long-term vulnerability. Investors know this, and they price it in. The result is a cycle of over-promising and under-delivering. Announcements generate headlines. Reality generates revisions. The industry's credibility suffers and skepticism grows. This is why $2 per kilogram has become such a powerful benchmark. It cuts through narrative and forces a reckoning with fundamentals. But this reckoning does not mean green hydrogen is doomed. It means the industry must change how it builds projects. Projects that show signs of success tend to be less flashy and more disciplined. They focus on integration rather than scale for its own sake. They co-locate hydrogen production with existing industrial demand, reducing transport and storage costs. They secure power from multiple sources to improve utilization. They reuse infrastructure where possible instead of building everything from scratch. They also adopt more conservative assumptions. They model delays. They assume degradation. They stress-test power prices. They treat $2 per kilogram not as a marketing slogan, but as a constraint that shapes design choices. These projects may grow more slowly, but they grow on solid ground. There is also a growing recognition that the transition will be staged. Expecting green hydrogen to immediately replace all fossil-based hydrogen at massive scale is unrealistic. Hybrid models, transitional fuels, and partial decarbonization pathways may deliver more real emissions reductions in the near term. Perfection is not the enemy of progress, but pretending constraints do not exist is. Another uncomfortable truth is that not all hydrogen applications make sense economically. Some uses are better served by electrification, efficiency improvements, or alternative fuels. Forcing hydrogen into every sector dilutes focus and resources. The projects most likely to succeed are those that target applications where hydrogen offers unique value and limited substitutes. The industry is entering a maturity phase. The hype cycle is fading, replaced by scrutiny and discipline. This phase is uncomfortable but necessary. It separates concepts from companies, slides from systems, and ambition from execution. $2 per kilogram is not a guarantee of success. Projects can still fail below that threshold due to operational issues, market shifts, or policy changes. But ignoring that benchmark almost guarantees failure. It is the line where physics, finance, and market reality converge. When future analysts look back at this period, they will not ask how many hydrogen projects were announced. They will ask how many reached financial close, how many delivered hydrogen reliably, and how many survived without constant rescue. The winners will not be the loudest, they will be the most disciplined. This is why the current wave of cancellations and delays should not be seen as the end of green hydrogen, but as a painful correction. An industry shedding unrealistic expectations and learning how to operate in the real world. The projects that survive this correction will define the next decade of hydrogen development. For developers, investors, and policymakers, the lesson is clear. Hydrogen economics cannot be willed into existence. They must be engineered, financed, and executed with precision. Every assumption matters. Every percentage point of utilization matters. Every basis point of financing cost matters. $2 per kilogram is not destiny, it is a test. And most projects today are failing it because they were not designed to pass. At Renewable Energy, the focus is not on selling hype or chasing headlines. It is on understanding what makes projects bankable, scalable, and resilient. Because in the end, green hydrogen will not succeed because people believe in it. It will succeed because the numbers work. And until they do, it really is $2 per kilogram or bust.